Good to have you back on Newsnight. Domestic workers in South Africa are barely making ends meet. Factors like rising interest rates, escalating costs of living, immigrating employers and not having any real social safety net available have all compounded the problem. Our local startup, SweepSouth, has just released its report on pay and working conditions for domestic workers in South Africa. Now, this year's report generated more than 5,000 responses from across the country and reveals that domestic workers continue to sacrifice basic needs as costs outstrip earnings. Now, let's find out more from Sweep South Africa's Managing Director, Luke Kenameya. Luke, thank you for joining us at ENCA. And of course, this is a very touching subject because, as we know, a lot of domestic workers end up raising some of the children in our homes. But how much are they making on average?
So what we saw in our report is that for those on our platform where we make a concerted effort to educate customers, and it really is part of the whole mission behind the report is to measure our progress to do this. Those on our platform are earning around 5,000 Rand a month. And this is on the backdrop of now where national minimum wage should be assuring a monthly earnings of just over 4,000 Rand. And this is where we are faced with the stark reality that in general, and this is still primarily in urban centers, so is higher than the national average, most likely, is that the average domestic worker in South Africa is just earning slightly under 3,000 Rand at the moment.
And that, of course, is one of the major challenges. But what else are they telling you on just their daily struggles as domestic workers?
Well, what we've seen is that there are many factors which remain consistent year on year, where the bulk of domestic workers are women. They're primarily breadwinners, single caregivers, and support around 4 dependents. But what they faced here is that the electricity crisis, mental health due to the perilousness of unemployment, and then obviously the actual unemployment with significant job losses across the industry really impacting one of the most vulnerable sectors and one of the most dominant sectors in terms of employment of Black women in South Africa.
You mentioned the electricity crisis. That's an interesting one. Maybe do expand more on load shedding and how it's having a negative effect on domestic workers.
I think this is where some of these factors may be hidden from us who are employing domestic workers, is that our homes are ultimately their workplaces. So it may be that for 2-4 hours, you don't have hot water or you can't use this appliance. So we see that work days are getting longer as domestic workers are forced to complete all of those tasks over a longer span of time. We also see that traffic in the morning and commuting means that, arriving late is now a much more of an issue. And then when they eventually get home, the times now that their workday has expanded, it often means leaving in the dark, arriving in the dark. And if there's load shedding where they live, it's even darker. And so we see safety, vulnerability, all of these things come through. But ultimately, and this is where we really want to focus, is that now the domestic worker, she gets home and spends time with her own family. Maybe there's load shedding now. And so what we see then is the time with their children not being as much, the time spent as a family in terms of cooking the right meals for that family, helping with homework, all of those systemic issues that sometimes are a bit hidden from us because, many of us may have inverters or other backup means, but that is just felt particularly painfully from the domestic workers in South Africa.
And it's clear they're not being paid well enough, but are they at least receiving the right treatment at the various homes that they work in?
Well, so what we've observed is that generally treatment in homes has improved over the years, but there are a number of very unsettling features. So we see that many of those who are dismissed don't believe that they're dismissed for valid reasons, and that then if they are dismissed and then are seeking social protections, many of them are not able to access that. But within the home, we do see far too high a percentage of workers facing verbal abuse from their employers. So around 1 in 5 are experiencing verbal abuse, with physical abuse falling below sort of 10%, 1 in 10. And just to the previous topic you were dealing with gender-based violence and sexual violence, that is around 2%, that domestic workers are experiencing that. So nothing necessarily to be proud of, but part of what we are trying to measure here are things getting better over time. And the person who is still able to employ a domestic worker, we do see that there seems to be an increasing focus, and I think this is also from domestic workers themselves as to what they're insisting within these homes, that they should receive dignified treatment.
And then just maybe lastly, but importantly, what needs to be done to help domestic workers?
I think one of the most important things for me is that seeing how the brain drain really has impacted so many workers losing their jobs is that we need to take a concerted effort as SweepSouth in South Africa, across civil society and government, that we need to pull up our socks and improve as a country. The economic problems, all of those filter down, because one of the most important things is the domestic worker is earning a portion of what her employer earns. And as we see that under pressure, and inflation put the pressure on the employer, those pressures are compounded on domestic workers. And so this is where, for us, the bigger picture is looking at things like the electricity crisis, like economic development, but at a sort of more local level, ensuring that your domestic worker is registered for the right social protections, and then from government side, ensuring that access to those protections and enforcement of those protections is much more effective. Because South Africa can boast that we have some of the best legislation in the world when it comes to domestic workers and their rights and their treatment, but it's the follow through that really is key.
Luke, thank you very much for your time. We certainly do need to do better in both paying and also treating our domestic workers better. That's Luke Kadamea there, the Managing Director of Sweep South Africa.